First, in alphabetical order, it's not in alphabetical order. We've got Andrew. He worked at Northrop Grumman this past 2 summers, I believe. Then we have Holly. She worked at Navair. Peter worked at Honda Jet, or otherwise known as Honda Aircraft Company. And Alina Creamer, who worked at NASA for multiple rotations, I believe. So you'll hear more about all of their experiences and how they got the jobs, how much they liked it, and all that sorts of good stuff. And we have 7 questions that we'll go through for each of the panelists, and open Q&A at the end to help you guys learn more. So first question, and we'll start with Andrew and roll down this way for the first question. What steps did you take to get your internship or co-op? And how would you describe the hiring process and application?
I guess I got my first internship with Northrop after freshman year. So I've actually been there for 3 summers. And at the time when I applied, I had nothing on my resume like most freshmen. So I think one of the things that helped me is that I know one of their employee leaders who works at a different site. It's kind of disciplined or like me, and so he was able to kind of like refer me. And so I think that if you know anyone who works at aerospace companies, a lot of companies do have these like employee referral systems. And it's always like a good thing to reach out about those. In terms of like the application and hiring process, like once you did that, I fill out an application on that online portal. You generally want to go through like companies' websites instead of like Indeed or LinkedIn boards. Like Northrop and Lockheed and everywhere have like pages on the websites. And then I got a call from a recruiter and had a phone interview after a couple months, and that was that. Like, I didn't even like do a video conference or anything. So it was pretty simple and straightforward.
All right, so I actually got my internship through the career fair. So this was last year when everything was virtual, just like this year. But last year, Zoom wasn't an option for them. So I just had a phone interview with a recruiter, and they actually had a day when none of their computers were working. So I just had to basically tell them my resume and like my experience, things I was interested in, why I wanted to work for them, that kind of thing. And then they asked me like other things that I like to do, like what do you like to do in your free time? And then of course your mind kind of goes crazy, like okay, what free time? But it ended up working out really cool. I applied on USA Jobs once that application opened up and had that referral from the recruiter that I spoke with. And they were really good about keeping up with me throughout the process, just kind of checking in and being like, hey, the application opened, make sure you apply. Or hey, you should get an update in a couple weeks, just keep an eye out. So they're really good about that.
Yeah, so sort of similar story. I got mine through the career fair as well. I did a co-op, so when I met them, it was before COVID and it was in person. So I went there, made sure to research the companies I wanted to visit beforehand, and went and had a really good conversation with one of the recruiters at Honda Aircraft that was there. Gave him my resume, and 2 or 3 weeks later, I got an email, said they wanted an interview. Honda Aircraft is based out of Greensboro, North Carolina, so I drove down there, sat for like 45 nerve-wracking minutes, and then did an interview. And a little while after that, they got back to me and said that they were really interested in filling out their co-op program. So I decided to opt for that.
Yeah, and for NASA, everything is pretty much online, but the thing I want to point out is there's really 2 tracks you can take. We have USRA internships, which is your typical, I want to just be there for a summer, or I want a fall internship or a spring. When Pathways is NASA's version of a co-op. So for USRA, if you just Google NASA internships, it'll be the first link that comes up. And that is essentially to bring you back to your college application days, a Common App. You fill out what you're interested in, different skills you have, any past experiences, but don't be deterred if you haven't had any. And then once you've filled that out, you have access to every internship listing across all centers, and you're able to filter based on, whether you want to be there for a summer or a fall, or if you have a certain location and center in mind, or just different, skills that you have. And you can filter as much as you want, but you can apply for up to 15 of those opportunities with that one application you filled out. And for the most part, it's becoming kind of commonplace to end up having a phone interview as a follow-up before you're offered one of those, although that's not always the case. So if you make it through without a phone interview, great for you. For pathways, which is NASA co-ops, you'll go through USA Jobs, which is similar to what Holly mentioned. And for that, you essentially just build a resume, but it's different. You know, here in school, we're taught one page, only one page, don't make recruiters read more. Throw that out the window if you're applying for pathways and going to USA Jobs. They want what we refer to as a government resume. So they want all of the details about the projects you're on. And a lot of times that will make your resume multiple pages. And then the process for that is they only will open certain job offers for a few days, sometimes up to a couple of weeks. But for instance, at Johnson Space Center, usually the application period is open for 3 days. So that's something you really want to premeditate. I would like to apply for pathways in the future. Let me build my resume on the program now. And then that way, as soon as the application opens, you can go ahead and hit submit, because that's all you need for the application. Based on that, they'll do a couple of computer run-throughs to see if you fit the description in terms of graduation and major. And then based on that, you can be told for a phone interview, which a lot of times is a Zoom interview actually with like a panel of people. And then a new thing that they added is a competency exam, which is essentially like a personality / reading comprehension. I haven't taken it, but I do have some info on that. People want to like talk to me after. So yeah, a few more steps involved with pathways, but in general, similar process.
And it's my understanding that you can set reminders or sort of like search for on USA Jobs for jobs like NAVAIR and NASA
Yeah.
Pathways. So put a keyword in.
So for USA Jobs, exactly, you can go in there and set based on a different filter. So whether you want like a part-time, a full-time opportunity, specifically something that has the word pathways in it, and get reminders. I set mine, I think, to like every week or so. And so it just was an extra reminder. If something was open, it would notify me of, hey, these 3 positions just popped up. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Elena. And we'll hop to question 2. So what kind of projects were you working on when you were at your internship or co-op? What'd your average day look like? So sorry you have to keep talking, but we'll start with you, Elena.
Yeah, so I think this varies a lot based on what project you had. I've had a few different rotations at NASA, and so because of that, I've worked with different groups each time. Where I was this summer, I was working with the Orion human engineering team, and I was in charge of their human in the loop testing. So my day-to-day was actually, I was able to go on site for all of the tests, which is mainly what I supported. And I would set up different requirements, verification tests for Orion space flight hardware. And a lot of times that was great because we got to interact with crew members or engineering subjects and have them run through our test procedures and then take that data and say, does, for instance, this seatbelt, when we pressurize the astronauts, does the seatbelt click? Like what issues did they have? Does it meet our anthropometric range of the 1% female to the 99% male, so that we don't have to limit crew based on their body shape or size. So.
Cool.
So did a co-op. I'll talk about my most recent rotation this summer, and I was in the structures team, the design engineering team, and I worked primarily on the pylon area, which is the part that connects the engine to the wing, and the empennage, so like the horizontal and vertical tail. And my job entailed a lot of SolidWorks, or not SolidWorks, CAD modeling. We use CATIA. You guys have heard of the program. A lot of it was sort of adapting previous parts to fit new geometry. A couple times I went down onto the production floor to take measurements of old parts and create new SolidWorks models or CATIA models to fit the geometry of a new aircraft or something. In addition to that, I worked with the stress team and sort of like system teams and stuff to make sure that there were enough rooms on the parts we were creating for fasteners, for, like if there's a system or electrical wires that go through that part, that there's proper clearances and that sort of thing. So a good amount of digging through standards and regulations, making sure your part is really up to standards before you send it on to the next step in the process.
So my day was usually a mix of spreadsheets and then this thing called WMS, which is like basically Navigator's way you clock in your database and all your information every day. Basically, you just have the one application that does everything. So I had a couple of projects I was working on. I worked with the AVH with Superior, and I worked on the F402 engine with that, specifically with the control side. And so there's a fuel metering unit in there. So one of my spreadsheets, I had to go back and look at old drawings and kind of take the torque limits that were listed on the drawings for different fasteners and verify them with the documents we had on hand. Just because they had some issues in the past where they tightened something too tight, broke something. You don't know the carrier's kind of old and it's no longer in production, so they're not making new parts. The parts we have, they're in short supply. We're trying not to use the new things. We try and fix the old things the best we can. So I think I heard the word sundown about like every day, which basically means that the plane's gonna get retired in a little while. Other thing they would do, these things called MEDPs, a lot of letters. There's a lot of acronyms. I'm kind of upset Eric didn't talk about them when he did his thing a couple weeks ago, because there's so many acronyms and I had to write myself a cheat sheet of what they all were. But basically MEDP is a material disposition. So there would be a part that was broken in the machine shops, and you go down and inspect it, basically tell the artisans what they need to do to fix it. So it was really cool. I got to first field post every day. I got to go down to the shop every day. So it wasn't all spreadsheets. My mornings were really heavily spreadsheets. And in the afternoons, I got to do more fun stuff. So it's nice.
Okay, yeah, so my first summer at Northrop, I was supporting the what's the tooling quality and inspection data team in El Segundo, which is where they do a lot of the manufacturing and assembly for the F-18 Super Hornets and a lot of the composites manufacturing for the F-35. And since I was supporting quality, we actually started at like 6 a.m. in the morning. So I'd be up every morning at 4:30 a.m. getting ready and like training work and stuff. A lot of my work that summer was kind of some spreadsheets, talking to like the inspectors who kind of the quality inspectors for whoever saw like the manufacturing text and stuff. One of my projects was kind of trying to figure out how to estimate how long it would take to inspect like all the necessary parts for different combinations of manufacturing quotas. And I had a lot of free time, so it was actually kind of cool because I just spent a lot of time walking around, like seeing how different parts are made and how they're fit together, especially for like the F-35. So that stuff's like crazy out of this world, how they figure out how to make these composites. And then my second 2 summers, I was working remotely, but I managed to transfer to a aerodynamics team. So I was doing aerodynamics analysis on a program for the Navy called Triton, which is a high altitude launch UAV that no one's ever heard of, but it's really cool. And the first summer I got to do a bunch of different stuff. I did some stability analysis. If anyone's ever used ADL for classes and stuff, I was using some in-house tools a bit like that. I did a bunch of drag estimations, airfoil analysis, worked with wind tunnel data, did a bit of CFD post-processing, so like a lot of different local stuff. And then this past summer, I was working with some flight test data. And we were trying to get that to the point where we could do some stability analysis with it. So working with the actual flight test team and trying to communicate across time zones and work sites, and working with vendors and figuring out why all the data that they gave us made sense and all sorts of fun stuff. So yeah, lots of kind of different areas across the summers.
Awesome, thank you guys. So question 3, which experiences, academic or otherwise, helped you the most preparing for your job? We'll start with you, Andrew.
That was a great question.
It could be any classes you took, clubs, something you did this summer to prepare,
I
anything
think
like that.
probably the most useful would be probably like group projects for some classes, and not in the sense of like having to deal with people like not group and stuff like group projects always are, but more in the sense of like having to figure out how to accomplish something or how like find an answer without having like a set way of here's how you're gonna do it. Like homeworks, you know, like you have equations, like maybe you have to like modify what you're doing slightly, the different problems that us, like fundamentally, you know how you're gonna find this solution. Even paying attention in class, and a lot of my projects weren't like that. It was like, well, we want to find this out. We have like these kinds of tools available. Like go read some textbooks if you have to figure out like how we can get an answer for this. So I think like being able to like do your own research and like self-educate the information that you need to like complete a project probably is a lot of stuff. It isn't just like, oh yeah, we use these equations and here's the textbook approach to solving it.
It's a good answer.
Alright. So, for me, as far as like classes go, and I'll be honest with thermo. I hated thermo, it was horrible, but it was very important. And I haven't had propulsion yet, so some of those basic concepts that were in thermo were very like helpful in understanding how the engine itself was working. Also, I'll say GC 120 helped. I'm biased again, I love that class. So it was nice to be able to know that I can think in 3D and I can visualize the component that I'm working on. And that was really helpful when I go down to the shops and would look at a like an APC kind of, where it's like a room that's connecting everything. They have all kinds of like stress packs in there, and you have to think back to, okay, if it looks like this when I stare at it, what's going on the inside? Or how would I see it when it's put together with the whole engine? And so that was helpful. And then like structures, learning stress and strain and solids, and all of that was very helpful, because again, the majority of what I got to do hands-on was, okay, we have this part that's broken, how do we fix it? So a lot of those kinds of things, and then just asking other people questions, because I really was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm scared to mess something up. So just asking people questions and then being able to read up on the documents we had on hand. Those are all very helpful.
Yeah, since I was with the design engineering group, obviously GC 120 was a lot of help, just sort of the basics of designing parts in CAD and giving me the sort of framework to learn how to use CATIA because it's quite a bit different from SolidWorks. I would say probably aerospace structures and solids in my case were really useful. Sort of like Andrew said, not necessarily because of like I saw a problem and said, I remember this equation from this class that I can plug in to solve the problem. It was more getting like the concepts and the background so that I could recognize where things might be useful. Most companies that aren't like complete startups will have a lot of documentation behind them that you can use to help you solve those problems. And knowing where to look is most of the battle, I would say. So having that sort of foundation that I could use and be able to keep up with conversations with coworkers without having them have to explain every single thing from like the ground up was definitely probably the most important for my internship.
Yeah, for NASA specifically, I think just having that general, here's what the engineering design process looks like, here's what like a systems engineering like idea is, and sort of the product life cycle is kind of a general thing that could benefit you for really any position you have. But then that being said, dependent on what group you're working with or what project, that might make certain classes more beneficial. So like if you want to go in and work in flight operations, but with the trajectory people, yeah, MATLAB is a great tool. If you love math, good for you, like that's your way to go. If you're interested in structures, having some sort of like finite element analysis background could be very helpful. In general, knowing any sort of coding language is always a plus. Even in groups that might not advertise they use that, you could definitely sort of say, here's something I can bring to the table, and like I'll find my own project that can benefit this group. And it's always good to stand out like that. For my rotation this past summer, just having previous test experience that actually came from previous internships was very helpful. in terms of understanding just the general test procedure and sort of knowing what resources to use and who to talk to get facility access. But yeah, just dependent on where you want to go.
Cool. Thank you, guys. And question 4, what was the largest challenge you had to overcome while you're at work? That could be a project, a person, a boss, anything.
Yeah, so honestly, I think that the toughest part for me was I was doing my first co-op rotations at NASA in spring and summer of 2020. So that initial shift of getting all the hands-on work and then getting completely teleworking was very difficult for me because I suddenly felt like it was a lot harder to like make, connections and group meetings and really try and stand out. A lot of times as an intern, I think you kind of feel this, ooh, like, I don't want to, step on any toes, but that's just like not the case at NASA. And so you really I had to get over that hump of like, I can still ask tons of questions. Everyone's just as willing to help me, even if like I can't see their face on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, the shift to online was hard for me also because just, not being in that work environment where you have kind of the peer pressure to work all the time. I found like I was being lazy. And so then I would have to work longer hours to get the same amount of work done. So NASA doesn't pay for their interns, you don't get overtime. So you want to get your work done during work hours. That's just like how it is.
Yeah, I'll give 2 because one of them mentioned something important. The aerospace industry has a truly obscene amount of abbreviations and that sort of thing. Learning to not just like smile and nod at my coworkers when they use them, because not only are there a ton, because nothing is easy, they're often like overlapping or contradictory. So really to ask questions and like, what is that acronym that you've been using that I have no clue what it refers to? And even like some of them, they've just been using the acronym for so long, they forgot what it exactly meant. So definitely asking questions, especially about that. The other thing I would say was my first rotation, I got a sort of crash course in working with some difficult personalities. My manager was pretty high up in our team and he was very brusque. Like I would ask him to like give me feedback on like how I was doing on a project and he would like cruise over and be like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, and then just cruise off. And sort of learning how to like take the useful information out of that and not take it personally, because he was like that with everybody, was definitely a skill I'll take forward with me to my career.
Yeah, everything you said about the abbreviations and asking questions, 100%, that's difficult. I definitely kept a running list like on my notebook of the abbreviations I didn't know and be like, I need to ask what this means. But for me, I'd say I ended up having a weird amount of free time while at work. So like I'd finish what I needed to get done in the morning and then I'd have an awkward amount of time and then it'd be lunchtime and then I'd get something to do in the afternoon. So during that awkward amount of time, I would have to figure out what to do with myself because I found that I don't like just sitting places and staring at a screen and acting like I'm busy. I'd rather actually be busy. So I ended up reading a lot of the publications that Natter has on hand. So like I read all the ones about the engine I was working on. I ended up reading about like snow skis for C-130 landing gear and all kinds of random stuff. There's a plane you're slightly interested in, they probably had something about it. Okay, I learned how helicopters work, it was great. And I did something else. What else did I do? Hang on. Lost my train of thought. Maybe I didn't, maybe that was the end. Either way, being able to kind of like take some initiative and be like, okay, this person said something in passing, I don't necessarily know what that means. Let me go learn more about that. That was something that I found was very useful and it helped me overcome that awkward amount of free time where I didn't necessarily have a way to go ask people questions or bother them because they were in the middle of their work too. But it was still really useful time.
Okay, I guess I'll give kind of 2 different spins on this. The first one was actually, I guess, a project that I had my, not this past summer, but the summer before. Where one of the, I guess, side projects my manager asked me to work on, was kind of waiting on some other information to come in. Was something that he wanted to be able to do with airfoils. And he kind of gave me this project, and he's like, so this is an idea I've had for a while. I've like kind of been playing around with the idea in my head. I want to be able to do this. But I don't know how you do it. I don't actually know if it's possible to do it, but like go play around with the idea for like a week or two and like see if you can figure it out. Which was very stressful. And yeah, I mean, the trick to that was a lot of reading, a lot of like again kind of learning where to go to like find the things you need to do your job, talking to people for help, and so I guess also synthesizing like things you've learned from different classes, because like I did manage to find a little solution to the problem. It was like a whole combination of like some MATLAB techniques, some math I picked up and like doing research stuff like for numerical methods. And some other stuff about like airfoil construction and geometry. So like kind of pulling all these different things that I've learned at different places and figuring out how to put the pieces together to find a solution to something that wasn't obvious. And then I guess the second challenge is probably like figuring out what to do with free time. Because like sometimes it like you're on an internship and sometimes you're busy like the entire time and you're just like running full tilt. And other times it's like, well, we're still waiting for data to come in for a vendor, or we're waiting to get test results back. Like we don't have like you feel like you just kind of end up sitting for a couple days or a week. Obviously, like you're getting paid and you don't want to just waste that time. And so my advice there is like really like reach out and talk to people, like experienced engineers, like frequently just like one talking to interns and newer engineers. That knowledge transfers are really important. It's also a great way to make connections. It's how I managed to move from like quality engineering to aerodynamics, to just like talking to people and reaching out. Talk to people about what they do, what they like, how they got to their current positions, what they enjoy. And like there's limits, right? I mean, if you talk to someone who's like doing low observables and stuff, like they can't say, oh yeah, I'm working on this program and I've done this, and this work. Like they can still tell you like things that they learned, how they got there, like give you a sense of whether or not it's something you should be interested in, like learning more about or what candidates are pursuing as a career path. And then also like reading through like internal documents and stuff, kind of like all I mentioned. There's like if you've ever wondered like, hey, how do we take government requirements and actually like start designing an aircraft around this, and how do we make sure that like we have not only design that works, but one that's optimal. Like that was something that was really interesting to me. You don't learn that in school, but you can talk to people, and at least like North of the bigger companies will have generally like have these libraries of internal documents and processes of like, here's how we actually do these things. So you can just go on to the internet and read them. And then, some of them are pretty dry, but others are can be really fascinating. And it's just like not stuff that you have access to at school.
All right. Question 5. What is one thing that you've learned from your internship experience that you'll kind of take on with you? Some of you already pointed to that, but reiterate it or point to another one that you've learned. So, Andrew?
I think I've hit this one like pretty good. I would just like really emphasize like most of what working in the industry isn't like figuring out how to apply what you've learned in your classes, but how to like first off you've learned how to learn, and like hopefully how to teach yourself and educate yourself to solve their problems, and also like taking bits and pieces from different like areas that you want to like assemble them to find like solutions to the problems. So it's not just like, well, there's this equation, my solver can exist. Like sometimes it is that, but frequently it's not. And being able to like have that self-sufficiency of like I can see a problem, not immediately like figure out how to approach the solution, but kind of sit down, push it around, and think through it, and like come up with an idea of like how to start tackling it is like really 90% of the work a lot of the time.
For me, I'd say one thing I learned is to be confident in what I was doing. I mentioned before, I would be writing in BDPs and I'd be like, I don't know if I should say this, I need at least 5 people to check over this before I tell them to scrap this piece, or that they can actually do this repair. And so part of that came from like in the way I was writing things, I was treating every TEI, so it's an engineering department, and I was treating it as your test question where it says, if so, why? And I would give all this background reasons for why we need to scrap this part, why it was justified that we could just trash it and have plenty of other spare ones to use. When really the artisans that I've been helping, that I'm supposed to be giving instruction to, really just needed to know what to do with the part. They didn't really need to know why, they didn't care why. So I just had to learn to be confident in my reading comprehension skills. That I had done my research and I knew exactly what needed to be said. And if I didn't, a senior engineer was gonna check over it, it's gonna be fine anyway. But yeah, just definitely being more confident in what I knew and how I did it.
Yeah, definitely that. One thing, another thing I would say is, especially like during internships and very entry level positions, you don't get extra credit for figuring every single thing out yourself. If you're having an issue with one of your projects and you just can't get past it, asking like a senior engineer or your mentor or your manager really isn't admitting defeat. For the most part, any like person who's been in the industry a long time doing a similar job has probably run into the same issue as you. And if they can't like give you a solution then and there, they can point you in the right direction, you know, what resources to use to figure things out. I know my first rotation, I spent a lot of time like banging my head against MATLAB codes trying to get them to work. And then I would like finally go ask one of the engineers and be like, oh yeah, that happened to me, you know, I give you this, this, and this, and boom, it was fixed. And what really matters is getting the work done. Obviously don't want to float, but sort of striking that balance between, you know, trying to, you know, work past problems and also not like getting less done because you're trying to force your way through something that you don't know how to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, like learning how to walk that fine line of, I want to put as much of my effort and not consume someone else's time to solve this, but recognizing at what point you need to look for extra resources and really be able to solve the problem. Like that is something that definitely was a huge benefit for me to learn pretty early on in my rotations. And then I would say just like in general, the best experience I've had from all of my different co-ops and internships has been learning about what I like, but then also what I don't like. And I think it's just as beneficial to go into something and maybe realize this is just not what I want to do. Because with internships, it's sort of like there's a trial period to see that, you know, you're not just accepting a job, you know, right out of college and then realizing, ooh, like this is not for me. So I have sort of curated what I'm interested in based on these experiences that I've had. And like now I can say I'm really confident and happy in like what I want to pursue within the aerospace industry. Because I think what I realize is there's a lot more that you can fit your skill sets to within the industry than I initially thought. Like I kind of was all over the board with the different branches that I worked with and different projects I worked on. And somehow all of it tied back to my aerospace engineering degree. So there's a lot more that you can do than, you know, maybe some of what our coursework focuses on. So definitely feel free to use internships and co-ops as kind of like a trial for figuring out, yes, what you like, but also what you maybe don't want to do for the rest of your life.
Cool, good answers. Question 6, what did you like most about your specific job or company? And what did you like the least about it? So,
Yeah, so at NASA, part of the government, that's like great in terms of, you know, job security, benefits, stuff like that. But specifically through the Pathways program, which as I mentioned is NASA's co-op program, at Johnson Space Center, at least, you get to rotate within different branches, especially as an undergraduate student. They'll assign you to the first group. So for instance, I was assigned in the command and data handling branch, which if anyone knows me, not into most things electrical or computer engineering. So that was a struggle for me. But from then on, you kind of get to shop around for what groups you want to be with. And so I was really interested in getting more like systems engineering, project management type of rotation. And so I then went to the space vehicle mock-up facility. And then from there, I developed like a passion for human factors. So then was able to kind of, learn from each of these groups and then have 3 diverse groups that were looking at me to potentially bring me on board full time. So that's a huge plus that I think the Pathways program offers, is just there's rotational exercises, and they're even now offering a track where you can rotate between different centers. So you have, 1 rotation at Marshall, 1 rotation at Johnson, and 1 rotation at Kennedy. So they're kind of expanding on that. In terms of what I like the least, also ties into government. There's a lot of red tape, especially when it comes to human space flight. I guess say we're more on the safe side, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but projects might not move as quickly as you want them to. And in just a short period of an internship, you might not see as much of like an end result if you started on something. So that's just kind of something to go in with. And then obviously if you compare it to more of your like industry company and private space flight companies, the pay is a little bit less. But if you're really interested in the projects you're working on, that's something you can look past. So
Yeah, sort of echo that. I did the co-op program and very highly recommend it if you can fit it into your schedule. I would say it's well worth potentially delaying graduation a year. You get to do a lot of different things. I went from the flight sciences department to the structures department, and I know other people have just done 3 completely different departments or done the same department 3 times in a row and really loved it until they got to do cool stuff in there. So there's a lot of options there. About Honda specifically, they were very fast paced, pretty aggressive schedules, and that sort of let me do a lot of different things, even in my team. There was a lot to do, and so I got a lot of work and a lot of good experience that I can sort of take forward with me. Least sort of the flip side of that is they do expect you to do a lot of work, and the schedules are very aggressive, so you kind of got to get it done quick. Another sort of gripe, and there's not about Honda specifically, but the aerospace industry in general is kind of like they said, regulation. There's an absolute ton of it. I was asking one of the senior engineers about like why we were making parts to this specific dimension or something. He slapped a book on my desk, like 900 pages thick. It was volume 14 of FAA regulations. And like 2 columns per page. It was pretty crazy. There's a lot that goes into it, and a lot of everything gets checked out in triplicate before anything happens with anything. So that sort of does slow down your work.
I think what I like the most, I like a couple of things, but first off, the building I work in was right on the flight line. So if anybody went to the air show this weekend, that's where I worked. There's a building right behind there, 133. It's great. So every time the F-35 would go up in practice, you hear that all the time. Every time the Harriers would go up in practice, you hear that. If they were working on like the H-53s and something like that, you hear those. It was great. And then I really like the hands-on side of things. I do not want to sit behind desk for the rest of my life. Especially not doing spreadsheets after the summer. So it was really nice to be able to, the way my building was set up is upstairs, the engineers work, and downstairs were all the artisans, and the whole machine shop was downstairs. So if you had a problem with something, you could actually walk downstairs and look at it. And so it was really nice to get that kind of like hands-on, let me talk with the artisans. I had one week where I worked in disassembly. So we took apart one of the engines from like start to finish, and then sent it off to wherever it was supposed to go next. And so that was really cool. And then in terms of what I like the least, everybody said it already, but red tape is horrible. Now there's government as well. So I think there was one day where it took us a good 3 hours to take 0.5 millimeter off a piece. And we really could have done it in like 5 minutes if we hadn't gone through all the red tape. So that was frustrating. I really like efficiency. I really like to go in and get my stuff done, and to have that red tape there and not really be able to move very quickly and just kind of have a lot of time where you're just like, oh, I'm waiting on this person to review this, or I'm waiting to get the confirmation that I can go ahead, was frustrating for me. So that's something that I like. points, but like personal ear show versus red tape, stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I like about Northrop. So it's a government contractor, so it's pretty good benefits. They put a lot of effort into making sure that, you know, the employees are taking care of like their work-life balance and stuff. And like, you know, you go to SpaceX, they're kind of big on burning their people out. Northrop has a lot of like resource groups for employees. And you think of them almost as like student organizations, but like within the company and with, you know, engineers and other students. That's one of the things. Northrop's structure is also like what's called a matrix organization, so there's a lot of room for like lateral movement within the company. So at a lot of places, you know, if you've been doing structures for a really long time, you're like, well, I'm really not engineering this, I want to do aerodynamics or, you know, thermal analysis. Like you may or may not be able to find like somewhere within the same company that does that. Just because the number is so big and has so many different programs and stuff going on. I know people that have gone from like quality to thermal, or from, you know, electrical engineering on B2 to like radar to like working as vice president. So there's lots of, you know, sometimes people focus in on something and become like a subject matter expert, but other times they'll explore different areas and just it's easy to move around within a company like that. So yeah, I think those are all good things. And then in terms of what I like the least, yeah, I mean, red tape is definitely an issue too. That's I think pretty universal in aerospace. Sometimes we have a bit more of it because we're contracting. Sometimes we have a bit less. It kind of depends on the programming phase. If you're doing something like really early on in the design cycle, you're going to have a little less red tape. You're going to be moving faster. Whereas if you're doing something sustainment, there's a lot of like checks and procedures to go through and make sure things are being done right because you're actually sending aircraft out the door. But ultimately, those, I think it's going to be it pretty much any aerospace company or about that. In case you can kind of pick that up from other organizations.
So question 7, do you have any advice for students currently applying for internships and co-ops? So we'll start with Andrew on the last question.
Yeah, I mean, like you should be applying now. People tend to like, there's a spring engineering program and stuff, but like Northrop's postings already on their website, Lockheed's already on their website. They've already like, I've seen like some rejection letters come out already. It's never too early to apply. And like I said, if you have family members or friends or even like, you know, acquaintances that like work somewhere where you're interested in working, like talk to them. Like try and build that relationship. And a lot of times, like if you have a connection that you can leverage and that they can like refer you or connect you to a hiring manager, that's like that kind of social capital is ultimately like more valuable than anything on your resume. Because if someone within the company knows that like that you work hard and that you're like competent, then that's a lot better place to start off from than like, oh, your resume picked up a couple hits on like their auto resume scanner thing or whatever.
Yeah, definitely, like networking, very important. The recruiter I ended up talking to at a career fair ended up becoming my supervisor, ended up becoming what now they're called a navigator. He's kind of like a mentor in the company. So that networking aspect is very important. I'd also say highlight, especially if you've never had an internship before, highlight like the projects you've done or the club you're in or any work experience at all, even if it's not aerospace related. Like my resume was literally like 2 SolidWorks projects for classes and then like my work stuff at the gym or wherever else I was. And being able to say, hey, yes, I'm an aerospace student. Yes, I'm getting pretty good grades. We're fine there. But I also have this whole other aspect of my life. I'm also like a full person and not just my GPA. That was also something they specifically said, hey, we like you because you're a full person. You're not just the grade that's on the resume. So I would say just kind of highlight any aspect of yourself you think they might be interested in. If you worked somewhere and this is going to be better if I just give an example. So like I work at Carmichael across the road. And like I said earlier, I really like efficiency. So I would talk about different roles that I had at Carmichael and talk about how that relates to efficiency and how as I worked in those positions, I made them better and was able to get more done on my shift. So anything you can leverage to say, hey, I'm not just gonna take what you give me, I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna make it better. And I'm gonna adapt it so that I can do the best that I can do for your company. I'd say that's gonna help you a lot.
Yeah, I'd say sort of combination of those two, the sort of counterintuitive reality of engineering internships is you're much more likely to get an internship if you had an internship. Definitely highlight what you have going, projects, extracurriculars, that sort of thing. Doesn't have to be aerospace, just find something that relates to like a good sort of work ethic or problem solving skill and like really lean into it and like sell it to recruiters. And also, like Andrew said, find every chance you can to meet one-on-one, send an email to a hiring manager, go to career fairs and talk to recruiters. Those kind of things are much more likely to get you something, get you an interview, get your foot in the door than just throwing your resume at a whole bunch of different online filters. Not to say I won't do that too, but really just take advantage of everything you can.
Yeah, at least speaking for like the co-op side of things, those of you in aerospace might know about our locked schedule with certain classes, like, hey, here's this class you absolutely have to take before any other classes, and we are only going to offer it in the fall. That being said, if you want to do a co-op, definitely look ahead at your schedule and think, okay, if I want to graduate by X date, here are realistically the semesters I could take off, or here's maybe when I would want to start said co-op. That's definitely something too where if there are going to be maybe any issues, go and talk to the advisors right away, make sure you're on their radar and you kind of have this like game plan for if I get a co-op at this point, here's what my schedule would look like. If I take it the next semester, here's what my schedule would look like. And sort of if you are going for a co-op, kind of expect to add on to your graduation date, unless you are really trying to rush 4 years of like aerospace or mechie into 3.5. A lot of times if you take a semester off, you're going to have to add that semester. I think the main goal is making sure you're not adding a full year and then paying an extra semester of tuition. Yeah, and if you're a little bit confused as to like what classes can shift where, come see me. I am very familiar with shifting classes around. I ended up taking 3 semesters off for different co-ops. Bit of a long story behind that, and as a result, I added 3 semesters to my graduation. So I'm very familiar with what classes can shift around where, because my schedule has changed about like 20 different times throughout my undergrad career. So that's the only thing I would say to be wary of. And then NASA specifically, really in any application you do, they are in love with the STAR technique, which is situation, task, analysis, and result. So taking any past experience you've had, whether that's be a technical experience, research, internship, or any kind of job you've had, or just group project you've worked on, talk about, hey, here's the situation, then say what your role was specifically to help solve that problem, and then what you did to solve that problem, and then make sure they know about the results. Like, did you go and present this work to someone? Was it efficient? Or hey, was this maybe a time where you didn't do as well as you thought, but here's something I would improve on in the future. Like, you can get just as much from that in an interview question. So those are my suggestions.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And I would add that the moral from this question is apply early and leverage your experiences, and mention that you're an AIAA. There's a lot of professional members out there, and the people you're applying to and talking to, they might be a member. So don't forget that you're part of the club. Can I give the panelists a quick round of applause? And to end off the day, we'll hop into quick, open Q&A. I know we have a few questions in the chat, but if you want to start, Brian, what do you think? Start here or on the chat?
I can do the chat.
Okay, and then if anyone here has a question for any specific panelist or whatever, we'll go with that.
All right, so the first one's for Peter, and it's asking about if you did any FEA or structured work at Ondo.
So I primarily worked with the design group, and they don't directly do FBA, but we worked with Stretch Group a lot. If the schedule had shook out a little differently, I might have got into a little bit of FEA. So there is that sort of crossover in your co-op that you may have the opportunity, like no matter where you are, but I did not.
Okay, and then also on that, did you do anything with like aeroelastic analysis, or was that not?
Mhm.
Okay, thanks. Next one's for Alina. Can you just repeat about what you said about the different pathways, hiring processes, like
Yeah.
when those are open and how long they're open for?
Yeah, so for USRA internships, which is your, I'd say, one-term rotation of just a summer internship, fall internship, and you're assigned to one project specifically. Usually you can always fill out an application, but I believe for like summer internships, they would be opening that application cycle towards the end of this year, and it's usually open through March. That being said, with USRA internships, as soon as you apply, you're eligible to be selected. So don't wait till that March deadline. A lot of times those internship roles will be filled before the deadline even hits. And so that being said, like, don't rush yourself, but also get your application in early. And then for Pathways, which is NASA's co-op version, you go through USA Jobs. And for that, I would just say, if you're interested in ever doing a NASA co-op through Pathways, go ahead and just fill out your resume as soon as you can, because the application periods, most of the time there's like a period in September. I believe they were released like mid-September for the fall. There's like a fall application period and then a spring application period. I believe spring is either sometime in January or February. I can like get those dates specifically. But for certain centers, they're usually either capped at a certain application rate or are only open for a few days. So like for Johnson Space Center, a lot of times they'll say, okay, we'll be open for 3 days for you to apply, or until we get like 200 applications or something like that. And so a lot of times you want to be able to just hit submit as soon as the period opens, and obviously have those notifications set up to let you know as soon as that period is open. Through USA Jobs. Yeah, it depends. Like with other centers, I want to say with like Langley Research Center or Glenn Research Center, a lot of the times those application periods will be open for a couple of weeks. Or sometimes you might get sort of like a rogue pathway internship that is open on the USA Jobs that is just sort of, hey, we have extra funding and we're not Johnson Space Center and we can offer that right now. Johnson usually sticks to the September and I believe the February or January application timeframes.
Okay, and like how long was the hiring process, if you can remember?
Yeah, so I went through the hiring process with Johnson back in 2019. And so that was, I believe, my application went in, let's say sometime in January. Within a couple of, I want to say days or maybe a week, it's after that initial computer screening, they'll say, hey, you are going to graduate with the major that you said you were, and like we believe you, and therefore you're eligible for this job. And so we're going to go ahead and forward your application to the hiring manager. And then usually within a week, you find out from the hiring manager whether they want to interview you. Then you go through the interview. I'd say the whole process took anywhere between like a month to a month and a half. It was very fast paced for Johnson. That being said, Pathways now requires you to take a competency exam before you even get to the interview stage. And so I'm sure they probably give you at least a week to be able to fill that out. So I'd say anywhere between 1.5 to 2 months now for the Pathways process. And then one point I do want to make for the competency exam, I have a little bit of the breakdown, so like if anyone wants to talk to me about that, I'm happy to share what info I do have on it. But the one thing is that that exam will stay with your application for a year. So if you're planning on, hitting a couple of the different application periods and you kind of BS the, exam your first time, that's not the smartest idea, because that exam score is the same one that's going to get attached to your future application. So the first time you take that competency exam, definitely put your best foot forward and make sure you're like prepared time-wise to really dedicate yourself to that.
Sweet, thank you. We can pause from the Zoom questions for some questions from you, if anybody has some.
I had a question. How did y'all prepare for the interviews? Or our phone interviews? What was the general preparation for that?
I'm sorry, nothing else. Okay. I know for me, I actually got this tip at a conference I've gone to. So I researched the company I was looking at. I looked at Navigator as a whole. The location I wanted to be at is FRC, so Cherry Point. So I looked at them specifically, and I looked at, like when you go and Google different companies, not only do you have the company that comes up, but you can click the little news tab, and it'll tell you recent events that are going on. So if somebody just launched something big, it'll be on there. If a new product is coming out, it'll be on there. So knowing, kind of being up to date on what's going on in the company is very helpful. I personally found the phone interview to be easier than actually sitting in front of somebody. Maybe it's because I wasn't looking at anybody else and I just had myself. But I'd say that was a big part of it, just kind of knowing what you're applying to. I'd also been to like every AIAA meeting about NavAir up to that point, so I at least acted like I knew my stuff. So yeah, definitely researching the company you're going forward. Definitely the big takeaways.
I would echo that, especially what Molly said about like, what's going on with the company, and like if you're applying to Northrop and you see that they just like launched one of the Omega rockets or the Strato launch aircraft like 2 summers ago, that's something cool to be able to talk about. But I one of the things that I would add is like understand like what the company's mission is, and like be able to expect a question like, why are you interested in working here? I mean, for like Northrop, I think that we do some of like just the coolest stuff in aerospace. A lot of times the military is in some ways more advanced than commercial aviation, because knowledge transfer can go one way from commercial to military, but not the other. But in terms of that, like also like Northrop's a defense contractor. Like I think like national defense is something that's important to me, and I think it's something like our country needs. If for political reasons or whatever, that's not something you don't feel strongly about, then like that's like something to take into consideration. Is like you can't get those kinds of questions, like be able to talk about it, like how the company's mission and values are important to you.
Real quick, before the interview, go over your resume and prepare anecdotes. A lot of times recruiters will look over your resume and ask you about your projects and how it worked. And getting your story straight sounds sketchy, but like know what you want to talk about for each of these projects and sort of tailor that to be like sort of something that the recruiters would want to hear as far as your work ethic, company values, relevancy of the position, that sort of thing.
Yes. And look at the STAR method, like Alina said. If you don't know what it is, and don't remember, just Google it when you get home. STAR method for interviewing. Yeah. Anything pertinent on Zoom, Brian, before we culminate?
Let's see. So one last one for Andrew about that airfoil project you did. What were you using to analyze the airfoils? Like,
Yeah,
what software?
I can say there. So I did a couple different projects. One I think I was talking about earlier. I was looking like not actually analyzing airfoils in particular, but modifying them. So for the platform, we had some airfoils and we liked some of the characteristics about and were potentially interested in evaluating them for other applications, but those applications would have required changes being made to them without altering some of their characteristics. So we wanted to be able to modify their geometry in specific ways. And so without like fundamentally altering the characteristics, and there's ways to go about doing that in airfoil theory. So I was basically using MATLAB and some numerical analysis techniques to basically implement a tool, or like I kind of created a code to do this, where you could feed it in inputs and tell it how you wanted it to modify things, and it would run some numerical methods and, spit out results. So it was the one that I had in math.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. If anyone here has a specific question for one of these four, feel free to just come up, as the meeting ends.